Let's take you live to Brisbane straight away. The Leader of the Opposition, Peter Dutton, is speaking. He's talking about the East Coast gas crisis. Let's listen in.
Energy policy is going to result in two things. It's going to result in a bills blowout and in blackouts over the next couple of years. They don't know what they're doing. If you start restricting pricing and interfering into markets like this, as we've seen overseas, it turns out to be a disaster. And the Prime Minister promised on 97 occasions at the last election that he would reduce your energy bills by $275. He's never mentioned it since. And I'll just say, next time you get your bill, whether it's this month or this quarter, watch it for the next 12 months and see if your bill goes down under Labor, because I suspect it's going to continue to go up. And if bills blow out and we experience blackouts in our country, that is going to be a disaster for small businesses and for families. There's obviously welcome news today in relation to Australian troops providing support to the Ukrainians. We work very closely, as you know, with the Brits, and when I was Defence Minister, we provided about $285 million worth of aid to the Ukrainians to help try and repel the Russian forces. It's an illegal attack and invasion on innocent men, women and children in the Ukraine, and it needs to stop. But until it does, then countries like ours need to provide support to Ukraine, and the sooner the better. So I welcome very much the news from the Defence Minister that there will be training assistance provided to use the equipment to its optimal level, and obviously that's a continuation of what we did when we were in government. So we welcome that. In relation to the announcement today on the Black Hawk helicopters, this has been a no-brainer. I don't understand why Richard Marles has botched this so terribly. The Black Hawks were ordered when we were in government. They were approved for export by the US government, and frankly, the Defence Minister's been sitting on his hands for the last 8 months. This was handed to him on a silver platter, and I don't know what's gone wrong in his office, why all of these bureaucratic processes have bogged him down, but really there should be a decision. There should have been a decision by now, but the acquisition of those helicopters is a great thing. It's a decision that was made by the Morrison government, and I was very pleased to be able to negotiate it with the US and with the company involved at the time. It's necessary equipment for the men and women of the Australian Defence Force, and the sooner we get them, the better. I'm happy to take any questions. Well, the Prime Minister was very tricky on this question this morning on Ben Fordham's program. If the constitutional question goes down, if Australians say, well, look, I just don't have the detail, I don't understand what the Prime Minister's talking about, and they vote against it, then the Prime Minister can legislate in the Parliament in a heartbeat. And I've made this point with my letter to him a couple of weeks ago. The Prime Minister has control, an absolute majority in the lower house. He can pass whatever bill he wants when Parliament goes back in a fortnight's time. He has control of the Senate with the Greens, and he could get this bill through immediately if that's his want. But is he saying to the Australian public that if you vote no in the referendum, that he will then legislate the next day to bring it in? If that's the case, well, pass the legislation now and demonstrate to Australians how it can work. We all want to support reconciliation. I've called for a Royal Commission in relation to the disaster, the tragedy that's unfolding in Alice Springs. And I noticed the news this morning in the Northern Territory newspapers around the Mayor calling the Attorney-General asking for additional resources. I asked this of the Prime Minister when we were in Parliament before Christmas. There will be vigilante action in Alice Springs because people are completely at the end of their tether. Police are just throwing their hands up in the air. They don't have the resources to deal with it. The social workers are delivering kids back into communities who are crying and screaming, asking not to be returned back. And I asked the Prime Minister to implement anything he could that we would support it on a bipartisan basis. And the pressure cooker that's the case in Alice Springs at the moment is going to result in tragedy, even further tragedy than what we've seen already. And I don't know why the Prime Minister won't act. And if the Prime Minister won't listen to the voice of the women and the elders in the Alice Springs community, then what hope could we have that he would preside over an effective narrowing of the gap if the referendum does pass later this year?